Hello, welcome back. This is Professor Kent Lee. In this video, I would like to talk about the challenges of writing in a second language. In the field, we often use the term L2 for a second language. This is particularly geared for those of you who are writing in English as a second language or doing other things in English as a second language. The challenges are important to understand, because it helps to understand these limitations are natural psychological limitations. It's not because there's something wrong with you necessarily. And this is true of anyone who starts learning a second language a bit later in life, like after, starting their teenage years or so, if you didn't have a lot of natural input and exposure when you were young in the language. And the challenges are this. What you're going to find is naturally your vocabulary is limited. You naturally recognize you have limited grammatical skills or ability, or at least it's harder. Also, what we call pragmatics. Pragmatics is how language is used in context. So, for example, you understand the words in the sentence, but what does the whole sentence mean? What does the person intend? What's the person's purpose or intention beyond the words? Or how words are used in context, sometimes with different kind of nuances or shades of meaning. It might, depending on the word and the context, it might sound too formal or informal or positive or negative or offensive. Things like that. And this is hard. It's kind of hard to have a sense of what's the right word for this context, or really what is the implied nuance or shade of meaning of this word. Does this word sound positive or negative? And there tends to be a reliance on rote learning, especially people from some educational cultures. Rote learning means mechanical learning, like memorizing. Now, yes, at the beginning stages of a language, when you're first learning it, you have a lot of memorizing to do. You have to memorize a lot of vocabulary. But once you get to kind of an intermediate or advanced level, rote learning can be less successful, and it's probably not the way to go. There are better ways of learning. Because if you're trying to rely on memorizing a lot of vocabulary and grammar rules from a lot of books, especially, say, test preparation books or really boring textbooks, it's not going to really stick in your mind. And you're not really going to know how to use those words or expressions in a real context. And that's part of the problem. If you learn something without a suitable context, your brain is not going to remember it. Your brain, in order to really remember something, needs to form connections. For example, if you're learning a new word, your brain needs to connect that with things that you already know. And if you just do rote learning of words from a vocabulary book, there's no context. There are no meaningful connections. So you might be able to stuff or cram it into your brain for a few days for that test that you're taking, but afterwards it's gone. Your brain will forget it. Your brain is going to clean it out. This is something we have known from psychology research since the 1960s. Your brain is going to dump it out. Your brain says, what is this? Doesn't go anywhere. Throw it away. You need context. So, for example, if you're learning by reading a lot, if you're doing a lot of reading, then you see new words in context, and you have something to help you form mental connections. And you can also connect that word with what you already know, your existing knowledge. Your brain can make better connections when you encounter things in context, whether it's reading, learning something through conversations with other people, or watching media materials. If there's some kind of a meaningful context, or sometimes like the location, the scene where you learned it. Sometimes you can improve your memory by remembering where you learned something, or remembering the events surrounding that. So I learned this new word in, say, Korean because, I learned it in this context. I remember the episode. I remember like the story, what happened when I learned it, or the conversation, something like that. Those kinds of contexts help you to learn. But if you're just doing rote learning from books, there's no context, there's no scene or anything to help you form good memories or to help you connect it with what you already know. Finally, a big challenge you have in reading and writing or anything in the second language is what's called automatic processing. So I need to explain how the brain works and how you do a foreign language in your brain. Think about your first language. Whenever you do something in your first language, reading, writing, listening, speaking, it's all automatic. A lot of the processing is subconscious. So, for example, you read something in your first language, and the letters or symbols on the page, your brain converts to sounds and uses it to look at the vocabulary, and it's all instant. So when you read, for example, your eye is scanning across the page, and your eye is hitting kind of the key words, important words, what we call content words, nouns, verbs, adjectives, adverbs. Your eyes are mainly hitting those words and other minor words or grammatical endings around them. Your eyes kind of pick up too along the way. And every time your eye lands on one of those words, it spends maybe 200 to 800 milliseconds there. It recognizes the word, jumps to the next one. So your eye is jumping. It's so fast you're not consciously aware of it. But your eye is actually jumping from word to word, and it's just immediately recognizing the words in most cases. And immediately it looks up the word in your mental dictionary and then connects it with the context. And this is happening subconsciously. You're not aware of it in your first language generally until you encounter maybe a word you don't know or something that's kind of not written clearly or something like that. But for the most part, this is all automatic. You're not consciously thinking about that. And you also recognize the grammatical structures automatically in your first language. There's a lot of abstract structure, a lot of abstract grammatical structure there. You're not aware of it in your first language because it's automatic. So all of this stuff is automatic. And that's partly because you've been doing this in your first language for hundreds of thousands of hours. You have hundreds of thousands of hours of experience in your first language. The grammar, reading, vocabulary, recognizing vocabulary, whether you're reading or writing, listening or speaking. It's automatic. And so what you are focusing on more consciously is the overall meaning. What is the meaning? What is the meaning of the whole reading passage? And also, as you come to the end of each sentence, you spend a little extra time. Again, you don't notice this. You spend a little time to kind of put the meaning of the whole sentence together and then connect it with the meaning of the whole context, the whole reading passage. This is true also for, listening or whatever you're doing, having a conversation or listening to something. It's automatic. Now, in your second language, a lot of this is less automatic. You're relying a lot more on working memory. So you spend more time on each word. Your eyes are going to spend a little more time on words, especially words that are less common. It's going to take a little more effort to recall, what does that word mean? Kind of look it up in your mental dictionary, your second language dictionary, and put the meaning together for the whole sentence. And to recognize the grammar structures. And sometimes you go, what does that mean? You're confused by the grammar, or you think more consciously about the grammar or more consciously about word meanings or the meaning of the whole sentence. So in your second language, you're relying on your working memory a lot more. In your first language, your automatic subconscious processing. In your second language, a lot more of your working memory, which is kind of up here in your brain. And so it's more tiring. It's less efficient. You have to go back and reread things to understand them. And the same is true for writing or speaking. Because you have a lot less experience in the second language. It's much less automatic and you rely more on your working memory rather than automatic brain processes. So it's more tiring, more difficult. It's less efficient. So what can you do? If learning the language is important to you, then, you just need a lot more experience and input. into your brain. So a good thing is extensive reading if you're not, especially if you're not exposed to the second language all the time in your environment, like where you live. Extensive reading. So that means doing a lot of reading on your own. Maybe stuff that's not required for a class or anything, it's just on your own. It needs to be, if you're really interested in improving, training your brain, this is one of the best things you can do. This requires regular reading, repeated reading over time, like every day, day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year. And it takes a lot of time. You have hundreds of thousands of hours in your first language. In your second language, not nearly so much. So you just need to you need to give your brain a lot of experience, a lot of input in the second language. Extensive reading, regular, repeated, consistent, extended reading, extensive reading. So that means just reading a lot of stuff. That's what we mean by extensive reading. Reading a lot of stuff. You need to pick something that's at an appropriate level for you. If it's too hard, if there's too much vocabulary you don't know, you're going to get tired of it, lose your motivation. Your brain is going to go, oh, this is too hard. I don't want to do this. So it has to be at an appropriate level where, there is some new vocabulary, but not too much. It's not overwhelming, and the grammar is not too complicated. It should be a range and variety of materials that you would like. Stuff you would like either for entertainment or because you want to learn about something, for information, maybe something that's related to your classes you're taking, but it's not required reading for your classes. So anything is fine. Comic books, Harry Potter, totally fine. Newspapers, online news, stuff that's related to courses you're taking, bestsellers, anything and everything. Again, it should be a range of materials from informal to maybe more formal. And you'll get exposed to a range of grammatical structures regularly and repeatedly to help train your brain, and you'll get exposed to a lot more vocabulary, and you'll learn vocabulary in context. So if you read different kinds of materials, you get exposed to different kinds of context, different kinds of vocabulary. So you'll develop maybe more of a sense of what word works in what context. So what does this word mean in this context? Not just the dictionary meaning, but the contextual meaning. How do people actually use this word? So you learn the vocabulary, the pragmatics, and the grammar, or syntax, as we call it. So this is the best way to train your brain. Likewise, exposing yourself to media materials too can also be helpful. So reading and also media materials, your favorite pop songs, documentaries, good movies and TV shows, stuff that you would like. Now, another thing is intensive reading. So that's when you need to read something very intensively and you need to understand it. Maybe it's something for school, for a class, for work. So there you engage in intensive reading. And a lot of people aren't really taught how to do this properly. Although if you've taken, maybe you were taught, or maybe you in a language classroom, maybe in a private language school. Like here in Korea, there are some, in other Asian countries, there are a lot of private language academies that will teach some intensive reading strategies where you're going through like an article from the Wall Street Journal and doing this. Well, okay, once you've taken that class, you don't need to take more classes there because you've kind of learned how to do it. So a mistake that people will make in intensive reading, you need to read like an essay or a book chapter for your class. And they'll go through and they'll start looking up words right away. Don't do that. Because your brain needs to develop a really comprehensive kind of understanding of the whole text, the whole meaning of the whole text first. So if you stop to look up something, you're breaking that. You're interrupting your brain's natural process of comprehension or understanding. So it's best to first just read through the text once or twice. Don't look up words. Just try to get the main ideas and look for the main idea or the gist or the main idea or the main ideas of the text and the various important key ideas throughout the text and some of the key words and key concepts in there. Then you can read again to work on the vocabulary. And maybe at first try to guess the meaning of words from context. Sometimes you can do that. After you've done that, then go through again and maybe look up words that you don't know and words, especially if they seem important. Then reread a couple more times to fully understand the whole meaning, the in-depth meaning of the whole text. Read again for comprehension. That's intensive reading. That's the way to do intensive reading. So intensive reading and extensive reading, as well as maybe you can also do this with media materials, watch a lot of TV shows and movies in the language as well, to give your brain input and exposure and experience. And also rehearsal and practice, maybe reviewing the intensive reading that you did earlier. Also, like thinking in the language. So when you're not actually studying it, try to think in the language, or have that song playing in your head that you listened to earlier. Practice, if you can, practice talking to yourself, or in your mind, mentally talking to yourself, or if you can, practice with an actual human. And this actually can be helpful. I studied German many years ago, and I don't have much chance to actually practice it. When I can, I read German news online or watch some German news video online. I think to myself in German sometimes. It's kind of fairly natural. It's kind of a weird thing if I'm trying to do a second language, any kind of second language, the German will come to mind. It's kind of there. If the machine is not working, I'll shout at it, curse at it in German. At least makes me feel better. It's good. And finally, take care of yourself. Taking study breaks. Again, doing something in a second language, it's mentally tiring. You're using your working memory a lot more. It's mentally tiring. Take breaks. Shift to a different assignment, or take a walk or something. Take breaks. Do self-reflection and meditation if you can. Reflect on how you're learning, how you're improving. Check your motivation for learning through self-reflection. How's my motivation? Do I feel motivated? Do I feel like I'm learning? Do I feel good about this? Do I feel like I'm interested in this? Check your planning and your goals. So have reasonable expectations for your language learning, and kind of check them. Am I meeting my goals? Am I progressing well? Are my expectations unrealistic? Do I need to, maybe do more reading, or more listening to something kind of interesting, like maybe more, the rock music that I like in the second language, instead of just doing too much intensive reading, because that can be tiring. So manage your expectations and your goals, check your progress as you're going through the process of learning a language. And remember, this kind of stuff can take years and years. If you really want to get good at a language, it takes years and years of doing this, years and years of exposure to reading, listening to media, maybe engaging in conversations and thinking to yourself. This takes a long time. Have realistic expectations of yourself, because you're probably not a super genius. You're not a computer. You can't learn it overnight. So be easy on yourself and try to have fun with it. Use materials that are interesting, fun, enjoyable, or somehow intellectually stimulating. So that's basically what you need to do. And so if you do this over time, this can improve your writing skills, your writing ability. Your brain gets more familiar, more skilled, more adept, more comfortable with different grammar structures and vocabulary. So over time, this is how you would improve your writing ability, or your reading ability, or your speaking ability, or listening ability in the language. It takes a lot of work when you're an adult. That's the way it is. So good luck with that. Take care of yourselves, and I will see you in the next video. Goodbye.